coming to the U.S. Army online seminar for career readiness. Today, our speaker is Walter M. Hurd. And just a brief background about the speaker, he is a retired colonel, and after serving 24 years as a regular Army officer, he continues his service as the Army Transition Division's Director at the Human Resources Command Center of Excellence in Fort Knox, Kentucky. So without further ado, Walter.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Walter Hurd from Fort Knox. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and appreciate your service really as educators to help bring the next generation into the ranks of the contributing. And I appreciate your passion. I appreciate your continued learning that you exercise here today. And again, I do appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. Really what I want to do is have a discussion and not a lecture. So I want to start off very briefly. If I can get just a couple of folks to sound off and tell me what kind of organizations you're from and what you're doing, and then we'll go on and get started. So give me a couple of volunteers to chime in and tell me who you are and what you do, please. Okay, well, I guess this is like public school. There's nobody's going to volunteer for that, so that's all right. I won't give anybody a homework assignment, but I will start off with a little bit of history. You know, 238 years ago, we just celebrated, of course, the 4th of July. It's important to note that before there was the United States, there was the United States Army. And as long as the United States Army is on the field, then our colors are not at risk. And no other than our founding father himself, George Washington, really articulated early, long before anybody else was thinking about transition assistance, he articulated very clearly, as you see here, that really the future of our democracy and the future willingness of young people to defend it is in no small part centered around how they feel veterans are treated. So over the last couple of centuries, our country has done that sometimes more deliberately than others, sometimes, quite frankly, better than other times. I think right now we're in a pretty deliberate mode and a pretty positive mode, and what I want to do is speak with you for the next few minutes about what our Army, what your Army is doing to prepare its soldiers to transition out of the Army and back into the civilian sector from which we all came. 100% of our soldiers started off as civilians. Believe it or not, even old colonels like me were not born with uniforms on. So at some point, similarly, 100% are going to take that uniform off and return back to the civilian sector in one form or another. So what I want to do, again, is really ask some questions. I want you all to think maybe about some things you've never thought about before and kind of figure out how you think our government, our Army, should help these soldiers transition. And then I'm going to be taking notes, and I hope you all are as well. Down at the bottom of this page, you see I've got the Military Academy study and then some policy and some life cycle. The policy that I'm going to explain to you is not here by accident. It's here after a very deliberate needs assessment and information collection process that the Army began to undergo about 4 or 5 years ago. We sent academicians and soldiers from the U.S. Military Academy all around the Army. And their task was to ask one simple question, and that is, what can we do to better assist our soldiers in transition? And they came back with some really good recommendations that began a re-engineering effort in the Transition Assistance Program, the program that I've got the honor to direct here out of the Human Resources Command at Fort Knox, Kentucky. So based on their recommendations, based on some recent changes in the law and White House policy, we really came up with a whole new program. And that's what I'm going to talk with you about today. So here's the million-dollar question. We heard what George Washington said a few moments ago. We saw pictures, although we didn't actually hear what Sergeant Romachet said. But the question is, so what does it mean when we help soldiers transition from uniform, from defending their country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, going back to civilian sector where they can become, again, a contributing civilian member of society? So if you would, somebody give me some comments on what they think there. All right, well, I've got a pretty active crowd here today. If this was an overhead, I'd do hand puppets or something until somebody asks a question, but I'm not going to do that. I would encourage you to chat some questions in, because I think it's more beneficial to all of us if I can get some of your thoughts, because you all certainly have a lot of educational and societal experience that we'd like to take advantage of. I'll tell you what the Army thinks it means. It really boils down to two essential tasks. We think as your nation's Army, we owe the soldiers two things. We owe it to them to prepare them for transition, and then separately we owe it to them to connect them with potential employment or education opportunities. Now, notice the word there on the second task, connect the soldier. We don't owe the soldier employment, nor do we owe the soldier an education, but we owe the soldier that introduction, the handshake, as it were, with a potential employer who can then talk to the soldier, or educator who can then talk to the soldier and begin a meaningful dialogue. So again, those two tasks, preparing the soldier and connecting the soldier, really break down into the nuts and bolts of what we do, of what the program that I've got the honor to direct does. So to help me and my folks do that, the Army's got a little over 700 counselors, each with a master's degree in some form of counseling. We have a 24/7 system with a virtual-based avatar system and a traditional telephone system, so that we can help prepare those soldiers anytime, any place. They can do it face-to-face if they're at an Army installation at a fort, or if they're not, or if they just want to do it at midnight on Saturday because that's when the husband and wife maybe spend their quality time together. That's okay too. They can do it through our virtual center. Now, most of the preparation really boils down to this list right here, about a dozen things. We think that if a soldier gets these dozen things, that they are career ready. Now, they might not be connected. Again, that's the second task, but they're ready. So you'll notice if you look at these, phrases like counseling and planning and assessment ring throughout many of the terms. So that's why those 700 people I mentioned earlier are master's degree counselors, so that they can take that soldier over about a one-year process, a couple hours a week, maybe an afternoon here and there, and really begin to counsel him or her about where they are now and where they are trying to go, so they can then identify some milestones and come up with a plan. So let me just talk about a couple of these things. You see the first one there, the pre-separation counseling. That's kind of like reading the menu at the restaurant when the waiter comes up and describes the special of the day, describes the favorites and the good parts and bad parts about everything on the menu. You don't have to pick everything on the menu, but you need to know about everything on the menu. We work in partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Labor. So each of those two have a counseling and a presentation as well. So soldiers can learn their VA benefits, education benefits, as well as benefits in home ownership and borrowing money and funeral details, you name it. And then the Department of Labor workshop where they learn some of the initial ideas about how to look for a job, how to write a resume, how to do an interview, and then they master those later on. The number 4 one up there, the individual transition plan, is really a key because that's different for every soldier. Some soldiers may want to go back to college. Some soldiers may want to get a graduate degree. Some soldiers may want to go home and work for mom or dad in the family grocery. Others may want to apply to big business, you name it. So each one of those plans has a pretty dramatically different group of milestones and direction. So that's when the counselor really sits down and talks through how to get from here to there. I'll talk briefly about number 7, and then I'll talk about this again in a few moments, 2 or 3 slides down the road. The MOS, the Military Operational Specialty, gap analysis. So we look at all the tasks inherent with a particular military specialty. And then we look at the tasks required for a potential employment interest. And then we help the soldier identify what skills they don't yet have, and then articulate the skills that they do have so that a future employer can make that link. And then also they use this gap as they begin to speak with the education counselors to further identify the skills that I don't yet have. How can I get them in order to be more qualified for the job? Kind of culminates with the 8th requirement up there, and that is we try to get every one of our soldiers, and about 130,000 soldiers every year, transition off of active duty and go back to the civilian sector from which we all came. So that's about 10,000 a month, a little more than that, 10 or 11,000 per month. And we culminate with them having a job application, which means a resume, a couple of references, and really applied to a job that makes sense for their individual plan. So whatever it is that they want to do, we try to help them search and find a job to which they can apply and then draft their resume, particularly for that job. You see number 10 listed there. We do an individual assessment, and there are many assessments. You all know about them probably better than I. The Myers-Briggs assessment, the Cooter journey, and many, many more. That really helps the soldier, the individual, kind of identify what they would like to do, their personal skills and attributes and things they enjoy, so they begin to map out their plans and their goals accordingly. Number 12 identifies a couple of optional tracks. So depending on their individual plan, their individual goals, we offer them 3 options in addition to the things above number 12. And those options are, each of them, by the way, are a 2-day seminar. A 2-day seminar on how to assess higher education. It teaches you about scholarships, about the SAT and ACT, really the mechanics of getting into higher education. We have a 2-day career and technical course that we teach in conjunction with the Department of Veterans Affairs, where we talk to them about how to get technical credentialing or apprenticeship, how to apply, what are the mechanisms to get a particular skill set. And then the third 2-day track there, the entrepreneurial track taught by the Small Business Administration, really is kind of the first part of teaching the soldier how to get into the small business, how to write a business plan, how to get business loans, how to do the assessment on what business is good in your location or in your particular area. So these requirements, these career readiness skill requirements listed on this page, really outline the backbone of what the Army thinks it takes to prepare a soldier for transition. So I'll ask you again, what do you think about that? And if we have anybody bold enough to push the question, push the talk button, or bold or maybe talented enough to type in the chat box, I'd love to have that discussion. What do you think about these skills? Are they, these readiness standards that I just listed, are they appropriate? Does it make sense? Too much? Not enough?
Hi, Walter. I actually have a question from one of our participants, and they want to know what the significance of the asterisk was on your previous slide.
Yeah, great question. The asterisk there, we've got on the top 3 are mandated by law. Congress passed a Veteran Opportunity to Work Act about 2 years ago that said everybody will do those 3. And then the remaining whatever, 9 or so, from 4 to 12, the Army and Department of Defense policy added to kind of further articulate their requirements. So while everybody by law must go to those briefings, we think it's important that by policy, everybody also get a budget and the resume and does that assessment, et cetera, to really fine-tune what they need to go. So that's a good question. Thank you for pointing that out. Other questions or comments?
Yes, we actually have another one. A question from another participant. How do soldiers tend to respond to this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you remember I mentioned the study from West Point a couple of years ago. We went around, actually, I guess 4 years ago. We talked to tens of thousands of soldiers, and their number one comment across the board was, "This is a great program. I wish I'd started it earlier." So the feedback we get from soldiers is really good. Initially, frankly, a lot of soldiers think, "Hey, I don't need this stuff. I don't want to waste my time." But after they do it, they realize, wow, there's a lot of things I don't know, and I appreciate the work. So I appreciate the help. So we get some really good comments and a lot of encouragement from soldiers. That's a good question. Thank you. Others? I knew there were at least a couple of people who knew how to work that chat button out there, so that's good. And now the other services, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps have a similar program. I will tell you, they're all a little different. Ours is a little bit more deliberate, meaning there are steps and kind of phases for ours, more so than the other services. We are the only service that has a 24/7 center. So again, if it's midnight on Saturday night and that's when a soldier wants to work on a resume or a budget, the soldiers can do that. The other service members, Navy, Air Force, Marines, I don't believe have that capability, but they certainly have similar and great programs. So I'll encourage you to continue to type questions if you have any, and I will get to them before we get off the air. Now, one of the things we learned fairly recently, just in the last 2 or 3 years, is that to be successful, you really need to start this preparation early. It's kind of like sending your children to college or yourself to college. If you wait until graduation, which is probably about May or June, your senior year in high school when you graduate, if you wait until then to prepare for college, to take your SAT and ACT and to figure out your scholarship and do your application, you're probably not going to be in college in September. It just takes longer than 3 or 4 months to get all that stuff done, certainly to get it done well. So the same thing is true when transitioning off of active duty back to the civilian sector. So what we've done here as a matter of Army policy is to scatter some of these tasks throughout the life cycle. Every soldier, whether you're a lifer like me, or a one-term soldier, or a National Guard soldier, every soldier has an initial phase, a service phase, and then a transition phase. So in every soldier's initial phase, we have directed by Army policy that in the first year of their service, they do some of this to begin to think about what they want to do when they transition. So we want them to focus on being a soldier first and foremost, because that's why they get paid, but we also want them to begin that intellectual discussion between their own ears on what military skill or what civilian skill does my military specialty point me towards? What do I need to do to be financially ready, not only when I transition, but now while I'm still in the Army? And what does a self-assessment, what kind of skills and attributes and interests do I have? So we begin to work on that in the first year or so of active duty. And then throughout the service phase, and that might be 2 or 3 years, if you're a one-term soldier, it might be 20 or 30 years if you're a regular. But throughout the service phase, at every annual performance review, and everybody gets them, whether you're a private or a colonel, you get an evaluation once a year, and then we ask the supervisor to talk to them about their long-term plans, their long-term goals, the long-term financial resilience. And these happen in that year. As you know, things happen. You move, you get promoted, you have children, you get married, divorced, etc. All those have significant impacts on that transition, that ultimate transition back to the civilian sector. Similarly, every time a soldier re-enlists, has that decision, which is typically every 3 or 4 years, they go through some similar questions. Does the military specialty I have, is it still in line with my long-term civilian goals? And what are those goals and self-interest? And then finally, for the regular, for the careerist, at about the 10-year mark, when they go to the intermediate education, which for officers is similar to a master's degree program. It actually is a master's degree program. And for senior enlisted soldiers and warrant officers, it's very similar. And at that point, we ask them to develop a resume. Now, that resume is not only for them, so they personally can start thinking about what they want to do upon retirement, but also so they can begin to help their younger soldiers think about what they, the younger soldiers, are going to do when they transition off of active duty. The first resume I had ever written was as a full colonel after 24 years in the Army, and I wish I'd done one previously just so I knew a little bit more about it, and also so that I could have helped my younger soldiers over the years. So we're now incorporating that in our policy so that all the senior leaders eventually will have done a resume at about the 10 to 12 year mark of their career. And then finally, over on the right side, the transition phase, about the last 12 to 18 months on active duty, that's when the soldier and their counselors begin to sit down and go through the career readiness skills that I talked about earlier. The counseling, the transition planning, the budgeting, the resumes, and that sort of thing, and really get to the nuts and bolts about what are they going to do next. Let me show you a slide that's going to scare you to death. I want to tell you a little bit about your Army, and then that'll tell you a little bit really about your society, and that's the scary part, by the way, and then that tells us how we transition. Here we go. So you got 100 kids in your neighborhood. They may be your nieces and nephews, your children, the kids down the street, your grandchildren. Here's the scary part. A large majority of them, the Army will not take because of various reasons. Typically, they're overweight, they've got a drug issue, or a police issue. Another significant percentage the Army will not take because they just didn't score well enough on the ASVAB, or they dropped out of high school. So when you add all that up, we've got a significant percent, again, that don't make the height-weight condition. So really only about 23% of the young people in our society are even eligible to join the Army. So when I talk to business leaders out there at Rotary clubs, etc., and I ask them if they want people who are a little healthier than average, a little more disciplined than average, a little better educated than average, obviously they all raise their hand and say yes. And then when I tell them that's the same kind of people that transition out of the Army every single year, that's really who they're looking for. So I tell them, and I'll tell you all the same thing, don't hire a veteran because it's patriotic or because you think you owe it to them, or in your case maybe don't take a veteran into an academic program to give them a break or because they need it or deserve it. You really want to hire them or allow them into your school to help the bottom line, because it's the top quarter of our society from the very beginning. We take that 23% and then we train them and we school them and we discipline them and we steel them by fire and give them back to the civilian sector. I want to back up one slide here and talk about the other half of preparation. We talked about the career readiness standards, the 12 things earlier. In addition to that, we've got some career skills programs so that based on a soldier's personal interest or based on their military specialty, we can help them get credentials or an apprenticeship or internship, as you see there on the paper, OJT or job shadowing. So once a soldier begins to define what they want to do and what skill sets they have, then we can put them through a program to help them transition with an actual apprenticeship or credential, and that's always handy. So let me go forward. I'm going to go through this slide again, but I think it's burned into your brain. It's pretty frightening. I want to talk a little bit about the skills that we take that 23% and we train. We train those soldiers really to fall into one of three groups of skill sets. You've got combat arms soldiers like me. You've got combat support soldiers, and then you've got combat service support soldiers. You see the list there on the screen in front of you. Hollywood would tell you that all soldiers like John Wayne, John Rambo, and me are in the first category, but in fact, the majority of soldiers, of those 130,000 that transition every year, the majority are in one of the categories at the bottom. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that all of those categories in the bottom correlate almost exactly to a civilian skill set. All the things that you need to run your society, my society, our electric companies and school systems and power grids, etc., are on hand almost verbatim in your Army. What you don't know, perhaps, is that the skill sets, not only the skill sets, but the attributes, the moral attributes that we need to run our civilian society, the strength and the values and the interpersonal skills and the communication skills that every specialty has, is resident in the Army, and that's really what you're getting when you hire a soldier. It is true, if you hire a military radio operator, then they can transition and become a civilian radio operator, but the best part of that soldier are these attributes here, not so much the skill sets, which civilian industry has, and you all are very capable, certainly as you know, educators, very capable of teaching and training skill sets, but it's these attributes that I think really make the soldier worth the effort. So let me ask you this, how does this translate to civilian careers? I know civilian industry, many companies have a transition program when they right size or buy out each other or something. I know certainly as educators, you all have a major intellectual line going on preparing preparing students for long-term employment and positive usefulness. So let me just ask you, what are your thoughts on how we prepare soldiers for civilian careers and how you all might think? So we had a couple of bold people last time who typed in some questions. Let's see if we can get any more. So you all continue to think about it. I'll make just a couple of closing comments, and then we'll see if we can get that video going. But really the reason we do this, the reason all of my counselors do this, certainly the reason my staff and I do this, is really that moral imperative that it's an honor to take care of these soldiers, as George Washington said, so that the next generation understands the pride and the commitment that our country has towards soldiering, and that being a soldier is not simply certainly a 9-to-5 job, nor is it even a career for a couple of years. It is a lifetime dedication. Even if you only wear the uniform for a couple of years, the culture, the spirit, the passion, and the values are lifelong, and that's really why we do it, and that's why I'm proud to be a part of it. So I'll give you one last chance for questions or comments, and I hope we can get some, and then I'll hand off back to Celia and see if we can get the video going. So any questions or comments? If not, Celia, back to you.
Hi there, Mr. Hurd. We actually do have a comment. One comment says, we found that their soldiers are prepared but sometimes need help translating those skills on a resume and in an interview. And simply going off that, something that I just out of curiosity wanted to know, is there a certain career path or field that a lot of soldiers tend to veer into afterwards, or is it higher education, or what statistics do you have behind certain career paths that are very popular?
Yeah, that's a couple of great questions. Thank you for bringing it up. Roughly a third of the soldiers that transition go back to school, either to finish something they started or to start anew with an undergrad or maybe graduate degree. And the other two-thirds or so are pretty much scattered out across the realm of industry, which is wide, broad, and deep, as you all certainly know. Because, again, the values that I talked about really correlate in any industry. And our soldiers come from our society with a pretty broad, depth of interest. Now, the first point you brought up is a challenge. So one of the things my counselors do is try to talk to them about how to translate that military skill and those military attributes and that military experience into a more easily understandable vernacular for the non-military. And as there are fewer and fewer veterans in our society, that challenge becomes harder and harder. If you were to say on an interview in the late 1940s or mid-1950s that you were a former squad leader, the person you were being interviewed by probably knew what that meant because they either had some personal military experience or someone in their family did. But we found now that fewer and fewer people know what that means. So what we try to do is really two things. We try to educate and counsel the soldier so that they can equate that. They can say, I used to be a squad leader, and what that means is I was a first-line supervisor for about 10 different people with about $20 million worth of gear doing ambiguous and broad tasks in a harsh environment. And then we also try to educate our potential employers. And we have a lot of employers and schools that come to the Army and we interact with on a regular basis. So we try to educate them so that they know the values and attributes that a soldier brings, and they can kind of internally make some of that translation themselves. But that's a good question and comment. Thank you for bringing it up.
No problem. We actually have two other questions for you here.
I knew you all knew how to type. It just took you a while to find them.
So one is, are there any other tools that can help soldiers translate military skills into civilian skills?
Yeah, there are several tools online that we introduce the soldier to that directly correlates your military specialty to all the civilian skills that are similar. The challenge with those is that it really only addresses the skill sets and not the attributes. And military specialties, some have different attributes as well. An infantryman, for example, may be much more creative in problem solving of complex problems, but their actual skills of using various complex weapons may or may not translate to the civilian sector as much, for an example.
Perfect, very nice. And then one last question. Again, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, and we'd be happy to address any of them. We do have a few minutes left. So one last one, the one that I can see from right now, is do a lot of veterans take advantage of this, career counseling that goes on? Is there a large percentage that you see going back and really trying to work with you and take advantage of that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. About 85% of the soldiers who got off of the regular Army soldiers, I think in the last quarter, about 85% of those met the legal mandate. So we track that in a fair amount of detail. A lesser number, but still a huge number, the vast majority did some or most of the other counseling. So we found soldiers, once they see it and figure out what it is, they are very excited to get involved in it. So that it's kind of one of those things that if you build it, they'll come, and we've built it, and now they're starting to come in large numbers. So I appreciate that question.
That's great. Thank you so much again, Mr. Hurd. I really appreciate it. So let's see if I can get things started for the video just quickly, because it's really interesting and I really love to show it.
And again, while she's doing that, I'll just say again, thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm honored to talk with you today, and I appreciate your passion in educating all of our students, young and old, across society, and I look forward to more of the same. So enjoy the movie. I hope you can hear it this time, and have a great afternoon.
I joined the Army when I was 18, so the Army is what I knew from the time I got out of high school. I served 11 and a half years, and when I made the...
How are you doing, everyone? Can we hear it so far?
Yes, I can hear you.
You can? All right, perfect.
...decision to separate from the military. And it's a scary moment in your life to step into that unknown. But ACAP was there, and I've been out for almost 2 years now, and looking back and seeing what I've utilized and having a very smooth transition, you just can't replace it. It's such a great service, and it's been so helpful for me and my family, to get out and to make that next step. I had a really great commander that understood the benefit of ACAP and really utilized it and gave me the time off when I had an appointment. And he knew that I was continuing on with service, just in a different uniform. One of the big things to convey to support for transition to leadership is, you don't want to lose anybody out of the service. It's also, a different chapter in their life, and to just be supportive once again on what decisions they're making, and to understand that ACAP is going to make sure they're successful for their, life after the service. I utilized the VA, the initial VA benefits classes, the resume writings. I had no idea there was a difference between when you had to write a federal resume, what they look like, and then, your regular civilian resume. So just the information that you were getting out of it was truly helpful. My ACAP counselors, they were very responsive on what I wanted to know. And they understood that when you lost the word or the terminology for what you wanted to know, they knew how to step in and kind of fill that gap. And when I first got up to North Dakota, I was actually low man on a totem pole on a hydro excavator truck. And my employer identified, that I had the willingness to take a job like that, but seeing kind of the work ethic and that initiative and that drive, and realized that I was a perfect fit in the safety department. The biggest thing I could tell corporate America on hiring the vet is you get such a quality employee out of the deal. And the American soldier is resilient. And those qualities and skills are something you just don't want to pass up to help your own organization continue to progress with great soldiers that are now great employees. My current employment now is I work as a field safety specialist for a construction company up in North Dakota.
All right, that is the video for you guys. Let me bring you back to the front page to make sure and see if you have any other questions. So again, thank you all for coming out. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure Mr. Hurd does as well. And again, if you have any more questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box. If anyone wants to speak up and ask a question, they're more than welcome to as well. Mr. Hurd, did you have any last words you wanted to say? I know you already said your goodbyes.
Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity. And just to remind everybody, Sergeant Romochet there was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award for personal valor. And as you saw from the video, is a very smart and articulate young man who has made and will continue to make his employers, profitable. So we produce a lot of soldiers like that. Obviously, they don't all get the Congressional Medal of Honor, but the vast majority have that same kind of moral dedication to what they're doing. So appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the passion that you all have in your career. So thank you again.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Again, my name is Celia Loomis. I'm the Digital Media Coordinator here at ACTE. And just to remind you guys again, there's going to be another Army Online seminar, August 26th, 12 to 1 p.m. EST. So keep a lookout for that. We'll be advertising and promoting it on our Twitter and Facebook pages. If anyone has any questions regarding that, it'll be up there. And then to see a recording of all of our online seminars, you can check out www.acteonline.org/live, and that's where we keep all of our recordings archived. So again, thank you so much and have a great day.